Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar, Intermittent Fasting, what it is, how it works, and what you need to know about it. We're super excited to share with you today our perspective on this timely topic. We want you to reach your health goals and are happy to provide you with information that can help you reach them while avoiding dietary and lifestyle pitfalls. This webinar is the second in our summer webinar series, Transcending What's Trending. We've found in our collective 60-plus years of personal experience as well as our research, education, and clinical experience that it's so easy to be pulled in different directions depending on the prevailing trends in the health world, and that education is the greatest predictor of success on a raw food and plant-based diet. For those of you who don't know us yet, I'm Dr. Karen Dina, and you'll be hearing from Dr. Rick Dina in a few minutes. We're both chiropractic physicians with a strong interest in plant-based and raw food nutrition, as well as the functional medicine approach to health. We're board certified and licensed in the state of California. We've also hosted raw food summits for the past 4 years, where we have interviewed successful, healthy, long-term raw vegans to share with you how you can be successful on this path over the long term as well. We're also the authors of the Raw Food Nutrition Handbook, the developers of the Science of Raw Food Nutrition series of classes that we taught in person for 10 years, and the developers and instructors of the Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online and interactive program, which we'll share more about later on this webinar. From this and speaking at many conferences and events over the years, we've become known for our thoroughness and scientific accuracy, our ability to make complex subjects easy to understand, and our encouraging approach that takes unnecessary hurdles out of people's way. Before we continue, we would like to let you know that the information and opinions expressed by us in this webinar are not intended to be used as medical advice and should not be used to diagnose or treat any medical condition or as a substitute for individual health care. This webinar is presented with the understanding that Drs. Rick and Karen Dina, us, are not liable for misconception, misuse, or adverse effects resulting from its use. Any type of dietary change, nutritional therapy, or fasting should always be undertaken with the supervision of a qualified healthcare practitioner. We may end up being those healthcare providers for you, but watching this webinar does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. So now we'd like to share with you a little bit about what inspired each of us to start on this path in the first place. First, you'll hear from me, and then you'll hear from Dr. Rick. I found raw food at a time when I was experiencing notable fatigue, for which there was allegedly no answer. I was in college at the time, and I was sleeping 10, 12, and sometimes more hours per night, and I'd wake up feeling like I still needed more sleep. I saw 3 medical professionals, and after multiple lab tests and evaluations, I finally had a diagnosis: fatigue of unknown origin. They had a whole list of everything that I didn't have, but could not pinpoint the source of my fatigue. I asked every single one of them if my fatigue may have had anything to do with my college diet and lifestyle, and they all emphatically said no. I started reading and researching different healing systems, which eventually led me to a whole food plant-based dietary approach. And when I implemented that, my fatigue improved. But when I learned about and implemented a raw food plant-based diet, my energy soared beyond the impressive improvements that I had experienced by eating just a whole food plant-based cooked diet. Long story short, my fatigue vanished along with a variety of other symptoms that I'd had for years, and I had more energy than I knew what to do with. I started to look healthier. I slept better. I enjoyed exercising and my digestion improved. I was so inspired by the health results that I was experiencing that I felt compelled to learn more about the inner workings of the human body, nutrition, and the diet-health connection. I really wanted to immerse myself in learning as much as I could, so I read lots of raw food books. I attended conferences and lectures and gatherings, and I talked to lots of different people about their experience. I even listened to a local raw food radio program. All of this was great, but I really wanted much more depth and detail. I wanted to find out why I was able to get so much better. I was totally on a mission. I went back to school to earn a second undergraduate degree in biology, and I received doctorate level education in naturopathic medicine and chiropractic, which helped me to put everything that I had observed into perspective and on a much deeper level. During this time, my fatigue recovery was totally put to the test. I received an academic scholarship for my biology degree, but I was totally on my own for all my other expenses, so I had to work half to full time along with studying for my academically rigorous classes. And I had to keep up my GPA to maintain my scholarship. On many days, I would go to school, and then I'd go to work, and then I'd study for a few hours, and then I'd go to bed. And then during my naturopathic and chiropractic education, I had a similar schedule. I attribute my ability to keep this schedule for as long as I did to my raw food diet. When I think back to my pre-raw days, there's really no way that I would have been able to keep this type of schedule. I was just so inspired and motivated by my results with raw food that I stayed on this formal educational path for over a decade, knowing that I would have the education and experience to make a difference in people's health with this solid educational foundation. Now, I've learned a lot through my research, education, clinical, personal, and teaching experience, so over the years, I've refined and revised my approach to raw food and tailored it to my individual needs. And with the educational opportunities that Dr. Rick and I have developed and teach, we can show you how to do this too. And speaking of Dr. Rick, next, he'll share a bit about his background and experience with raw food and plant-based nutrition with you.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for tuning into our webinar. Now that you've heard from Dr. Karen, I'm going to share with you just a few relevant pieces of my history and my background that led me to where I am today with whole food, plant-based, and raw food nutrition. So I ate conventionally growing up, and for the most part, I was a pretty healthy kid, with the major exception of some hay fever allergy type issues that developed about mid-elementary school. So what would happen is every spring, and then secondarily in the fall, my nose would drip, sometimes hours at a time, sometimes all day. My eyes would get red and itchy and watery. And worst of all, when this was going on, I would feel completely drained of energy, totally exhausted. Several days a year, I had to miss school and work, and I even missed an entire year of playing Little League baseball. Moving on to my freshman year in college, I gained the classic freshman 15, but I already had a 15-pound head start from high school. And here we have a picture of me with that extra weight, and I was having a pretty bad allergy day at the time as well. And it really motivated me to want to start making some changes to my diet and lifestyle to see if I could feel better. So I started to make some significant changes after my freshman year in college, or starting near the end of that. And over the summer, before my sophomore year, I lost about 15 pounds of extra fat. I really felt so much better that I kept reading and kept learning and kept implementing. And about a year after that start, I switched my diet to vegan, all vegan, and mostly raw at about the same time. That brought my health up several levels, and I've maintained about a 90% raw diet ever since then. So here's a photo of me when I was a few months into being raw and vegan, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. Again, I felt so much better than I did about a year before. So I wanted to keep learning as much as I could. I read books, magazines, went to conferences, listened to audio programs in the car while I was driving, and just filled myself up with as much information as I could. My junior year in college, I fasted on water only for 14 days while living in my college dorm. That was in the winter, and in addition to so many other benefits, I noticed when that spring came along, I had almost no allergy symptoms. I was just absolutely blown away and so impressed. That fueled my motivation to keep learning more and more. In fact, later on my junior year, when it was spring weekend and there were bands and parties and all sorts of fun things happening on campus, I drove several hours to attend a raw food conference, and I've never regretted that decision ever since then. Moving on to some continued history, back in 1991, I worked at Hippocrates Health Institute. Later that year, I went to work for the Juice Man Company. I was part of the support team that flew around the country and set up events in hotels and sold juicers and told people about the benefits of juices and fresh fruit and vegetable-based diets. It's a lot of fun. Sometimes a crowd would gather around while I was explaining things, and I just thought, hey, this is cool. So no wonder years later, I'm speaking to you now on this webinar. I still wanted to keep learning more in as much depth as I can, so I went back to school to earn a doctorate degree in chiropractic, where I was learning all of the foundational sciences and getting things in just exponentially more depth than I understood them before, and things are really, really coming together. That gave me the opportunity to go out to Northern California and be on staff as a fasting doctor, which I did for 4 years, and I gained such a wealth of clinical experience, not only from seeing the fasting patients, but having that doctorate background, as well as learning from more experienced doctors. That just brought things again to a whole new level. Just for fun, here's a picture of me when I was at True North. That was 12 years in now to being a vegan. Now, I was so much in my element there, teaching people about nutrition and seeing what happens with fasting, but I actually left after 4 years because I was young and emotional and I was in love. So I moved to be with the woman I fell in love with. I actually moved up to Seattle, Washington. And while I was there, I put together a program that I taught at Bastyr University for naturopathic medical students. And as it turns out, that woman who I fell in love with was Dr. Karen. And so we had there was a good outcome there. We teamed up. And later on, skipping a few years, we developed a curriculum called The Science of Raw Food Nutrition, and we taught that in person for 10 years. And then after that 10 years of teaching in person, we updated, improved, and expanded that into our online Mastering Raw Food Nutrition program. Also, since about 2011, I have been in clinical practice where I work with people regarding lab work and dialing in their diets who are interested in raw food and vegan paths. And that oftentimes gives me a much different perspective compared to just reading journal articles that we do a lot of and put together and make sense. So all of this comes together in our curriculum. And for those of you interested, we're going to talk more about the details of that at the end of this webinar. In the 30 years that Dr. Karen and I have each been on this path, we have seen so many trends come and so many trends go in the plant-based, raw food, and general health fields over this time. But what has always been consistent, no matter what or who was trending at the time, is that when people add more fresh fruits and vegetables and other whole natural plant foods to their diets, while simultaneously decreasing, or better yet, eliminating processed foods, all sorts of health benefits can be realized, as many of you have heard so many examples of in our raw food summits over the past 4 years and in other places, and maybe for many of you in your own experience as well. We sincerely want all of you to be able to understand the most important concepts and practices so you can achieve extraordinary health no matter who or what is trending at the time. We truly want all of you to be trend-proof. So many times when something seemingly new comes on the scene, we think to ourselves how incredibly important it is to have a strong, solid foundation in a scientifically valid perspective of nutrition so you can make sense out of what you see and what you hear. With this foundation, you are so much better equipped to be able to distinguish what is valuable from what is not. So an example from class. So after about 6 hours worth of some really intensive in-depth study and analysis of fatty acids and essential fats and omega-3 conversion, where we look at a bunch of case histories and go through all different foods and diets and really analyze everything really thoroughly, on one of our weekly conference calls, a student raised her hand and said, "Okay, Dr. Rick, I want to make sure I understood this." And she was explaining everything, and I was very proud of her. She was getting it all right. And then she put that together with a YouTube video that she had seen with somebody explaining why they've now left the movement. And fatty acid imbalance and not having enough DHA was one of the movements she cited. And our students said, "Oh my gosh, here's what we're learning in class. Here's what this person said. And if only this person had that solid foundation, they never would have had to leave the movement in the first place because they could have gotten what they needed within the raw vegan realm and therefore continued to get all the benefits from it." So I was very proud of my student, and it's a really good example. So you can't just go to Dr. Google or earn a PhD from YouTube and think that you've got it all covered. If this was true, then we would see more people staying in the movement these days than compared to before social media came on the scene. But in fact, it's just the opposite. So when you have the truly solid foundation, this allows you to stay on track and truly achieve a lifetime of supercharged health. And once again, that's what we want for every single one of you. Having said that, let's now move on to our topic for this webinar in our Transcending What's Trending series. The topic for this webinar is intermittent fasting. Now, in order to make intermittent fasting make the most sense, we're going to look at it in the context of some other ideas that all work together. So we're going to take a look at longevity and aging theories, calorie density, and water fasting. Now, in our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition curriculum, we actually have a 2-hour section on each of these topics. But for now, we're just going to look at a few of the relevant highlights to put intermittent fasting into the most appropriate perspective. Going back to the 1930s, Dr. Clive McKay and his colleagues at Cornell University discovered that when they fed one group of rats less food than another group of rats, that those rats lived about 33% longer than the normally fed group. So a typical rat lives 3 years, and the rats that were fed fewer calories actually lived 4 years on average. Now, since that time, they've repeated this study many, many times, and what they have found is that those rats that live longer actually stayed youthful for longer also and suffered fewer late life diseases. And I just want to make it clear they were very nice to the rats. They didn't harm them. They just fed them different amounts of food and let them all get to the end of their natural lives. Okay, so since that time, they've come up with this term called caloric restriction, which I'll talk about in a minute. I'm not such a fan of the term, but that has been the only intervention shown within the scientific literature to convincingly slow the aging process, not only in rodents, but in every kind of species they've ever tested. So single-celled organisms, roundworms, fruit flies, fish. There are 3 studies currently being conducted with monkeys. Now they're getting to the end of the experiment with the monkeys, and it's looking really good thus far, but they haven't all gotten to the end of their natural lives. And there's some pretty solid, although a little bit indirect, evidence that this can work extremely well with human beings. Now, I'm not always a fan of animal studies. Besides the compassion/cruelty component, you can't always take one species, do an experiment, figure some things out, and extrapolate that to another. You can't necessarily figure out what the ultimate diet is for alligators and then say, well, human beings and rodents must function perfectly on that diet also. But with this lower calorie intake and increased longevity and extending youth and having fewer diseases later in life, that has been universal every single time in every species ever studied. So when that's the case, then we know we're on to a really solid general principle. So it's easy to know how long an individual lived. But how can you tell if they're young or old biologically, their biological age versus their chronological age? And so there are about 300 different biomarkers of aging. And we've heard of a lot of these things like blood pressure and cholesterol and glucose and insulin and stress from free radicals. And those all tend to go up as we age, whereas other things like immune response, muscle mass, bone density, tissue elasticity, meaning that the tissues are flexible, ability to learn new things, the cell's ability to produce new proteins that protect the cells and do other important things in the body, those things tend to go down as we age. So you can look at these markers and get an idea of the biological age of an organism in addition to knowing their chronological age. Now, what we find is with optimized calorie intake, I'm not talking about restriction here, but optimizing calorie intake, we find some really cool things when we look at cellular mechanisms of aging. We find things like decreased production of free radicals. When our body runs its metabolic machinery, free radicals are a natural byproduct of those processes. So when we overeat, we produce excessive amounts of free radicals. When we eat just the right amount, we produce some, but we don't produce excess. Now, when we eat healthy foods, then they have antioxidants in them and to counteract the free radicals that are inevitably generated. Now, as an added bonus, our body produces its own antioxidant enzymes. Those tend to decrease in level over time because our body loses its ability to produce those as well. But when organisms are eating an optimal amount of calories instead of overeating, the level of that antioxidant enzyme production stays high, further protecting you from the fewer free radicals that were generated in the first place. So there's a lot to that. Part of why our tissues get stiffer as we age is they get cross-linked, particularly the major connective tissue in the body called collagen gets stuck together. And there's a whole lot of science behind that I love going into, but we'll just mention that now. So we see less of that, and that's part of what explains increased tissue elasticity as we're younger and decreased as we get older. For those of you who have heard of these cellular structures called telomeres, they tend to be long when you're young. They get short when you get old. They get to a critically short point where the cell doesn't divide and it forms the types of cells that accelerate aging because it damages other cells. Long story there, but it's pretty cool. But what we see with caloric optimization is the telomeres stay long for longer into the lifespan, and that's really cool. And so there's a whole bunch of other mechanisms, but all of these, or not all of them, the majority of them stay young for longer with optimum calorie intake in all different organisms, and that is really cool. Now, going to this idea of caloric restriction. I'm not a big fan of that term because who wants to go throughout their life feeling restricted? I can't eat this, I can't eat that, I'm hungry, I'm kind of stressed, but it'll be worth it because I'll live to 94 instead of 88, but I'll be like this my whole life. That doesn't sound enjoyable to me. So instead of doing things like, and some of my mentors in longevity studies, have things like, let's use a lot of olive oil and have whole wheat toast, but just don't eat too much to keep your calorie intake down. What I would suggest for all of you, because this is what I've been doing for many years, and Dr. Karen has as well, and lots of other people, is that you actually increase your quantity of food to decrease your calories. Well, how do you do that? You focus your diet on things like fruits and vegetables so you can fill up and feel really full and satisfied with just the right amount of calories. And it's much more fun, and you get the best of both worlds that way, feeling full and optimizing your calorie intake. Well, how does that work? Well, fruits and vegetables are high in water content. They're high in fiber content, and they're low in fat content, but as long as you eat enough vegetables, you have an adequate amount of healthy fats, and that's fantastic. Again, large volumes, but low in calories. At the same time, they're extremely nutrient dense. Vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, many of which act as antioxidants, are very abundant in these foods, and those are part of the longevity process as well. Okay, so skipping over to water fasting, we can look at 3 rough phases of water fasting based on where the body is getting energy from at that time. So you can see here that phase 1 says energy is derived from the last meal. Now, this obviously isn't unique to fasting. 2 hours after your last meal, you're not fasting, you're most likely still digesting, but yet you have to start somewhere. Now, eventually, when you use up the energy from that last meal, you start to enter phase 2. And that's where energy comes from your glycogen reserves. And glycogen is stored up glucose in our skeletal muscles and in our livers. And this is common in between meals. You run out of food or you run out of energy, your body goes to its first gas tank, if you will, and you use energy from that. Now, I want to point one thing out that we will get more into detail in our upcoming webinar on ketogenic diets, that the body will go for its glycogen reserves before it starts getting energy from body fat. Even if you're very lean, you have much more energy reserves in your fat tank than you do in your glycogen tank. But your body will go for glycogen first because most cells in the body prefer to run on glucose when they have the opportunity. That's why the body does that. And then fat comes after that. So depending on if you're female or male, it takes about 1 to 2 days to use up your glycogen and then go into your body's fat reserves. And in my opinion, this in phase 3, when you're burning fat for energy, is when you're really into the fasting phase. You've missed several meals, your body's had a while where it hasn't had to digest yet, and things are getting in there for real. I'm not convinced that 2 hours after, or 3 hours, even 4 hours after a meal that you're actually fasting. When you're getting into your glycogen reserves, if you're getting pretty far into those, maybe you are. And then there's this whole study of autophagy or autophagy, if you want to sound a bit more sophisticated about it. And there's a lot more to that also. I do want to make one thing abundantly clear. Extraordinary benefits can come from water fasting. And the reason we get those benefits is not because the body is in ketosis. Ketones being the byproducts of fat metabolism, which when you're fasting and you're out of glycogen, the body has no choice but to burn fat for energy. That's not the benefit. The benefit comes from the fact that we haven't been eating for a while, and instead of our body's resources going toward digesting and metabolizing our food and eliminating it, doesn't have to do that. It can go toward cleansing, healing, and repairing. The ketones just happen to be there as byproducts of fat metabolism. So many of those markers of aging and other things improve with water fasting. And I spent 4 years in clinical practice where I saw several hundred water fasting patients, and it was absolutely an extraordinary process to witness. So blood pressure decreases, type 2 diabetes reverses, patients report greater flexibility, debilitating autoimmune diseases typically reverse. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary what the body can do when we free up resources to allow it to heal itself. Okay, so now we get to intermittent fasting. Now you'll notice I have quotes around the term fasting here because based on my thoughts earlier, you're not getting into phase 3 of fasting, the start of real fasting, in my opinion. You may be getting a little bit into phase 2, and that's getting solid because your body hasn't eaten a while and it's getting a break, and that's good to see. So because we are reducing our calorie intake, starting from the reference point of most people consuming too many calories, because we're reducing calorie intake, a lot of those cellular mechanisms are kicking in, and we get many of the same benefits that optimizing our calorie intake and water fasting show us. Because we're lowering our calorie intake, we're getting closer to optimum. So we're starting to head toward the fasting end of the spectrum, and there can be great benefit from that. Now, intermittent fasting has a variety of different applications. Some of you who have heard of Dr. Mosley's work have heard of the 5-2 diet, where you eat normally 5 days of the week, and then 2 days of the week you eat only 500 to 600 calories. 500 to 600 calories in a day is not a fast, but that's a lot fewer calories than most people are eating. Your body gets a break. We're getting closer to an optimum calorie intake, and that's very beneficial. Those of you familiar with Dr. Walter Longo's work know that he talks about his fasting mimicking diet. And again, we're reducing calories, we're eating more whole natural plant foods, we're eating more fiber, we're getting more nutrients in, and that is tremendously beneficial. Now, compared to super ideal standards, though, when I hear claims like all the health benefits of fasting without the hunger, I think all the benefits? That's an exaggerated statement, but some of the benefits, absolutely. And when I hear other things like, quote, pour olive oil generously on salads and other dishes, I'd rather see people do that than eat bacon and sausage like they do on ketogenic diets. But compared to really ideal health, which is absolutely achievable, olive oil doesn't really have a fundamental place doing that. But nevertheless, there are huge improvements to be realized with that approach. And then another typical popular application of intermittent fasting is the 16-hour daily fast. And this is the one we're going to actually explore in a bit more detail. And in doing so, that will help us understand how the other two applications work as well. So let's jump on in here. So the basic premise here, all sorts of cool scientific stuff that I love teaching and talking about happen during the fasting process and in the body in general. The basic principle that oversees, if you will, all of this is that as we increase our food intake, our body has to utilize resources to get the energy and the nutrient value out of that food. And we've got this interplay here. So the more food you consume, the more you make your body work to deal with that food, and then the less capacity your body has during that time to cleanse, heal, and repair itself. So to look at things here, think about this. Have you ever consumed a big Thanksgiving meal? You got the turkey, the gravy, the mashed potatoes, the stuffing, a few vegetables in there, and then you've got some pumpkin pie for dessert, maybe some ice cream on top of it. I mean, are you ready to go out and run a marathon? Could you even? Could you run or swim during that time? No, your body is so busy digesting food, that its resources are there. And it's more than just the blood going to your stomach. There's a lot more involved. So during that time, your body's not maximizing its healing capacity. Down here, if you haven't eaten for a few days or so and your body's getting deep into the deep cleansing fasting mode, you have a lot of capacity to deal with things like bodily repair and cleansing and healing. And so we have this inverse relationship going on. Okay, here is my 24-hour clock of feeding and fasting. So we have midnight up at the top, noon down at the bottom, and of course the other times interspersed in between. So what we have here is orange represents when we eat a meal. Red, like we saw with the red here, represents when we're digesting that food. And then once we're done digesting all the food of the day, we get into the green zone where the body isn't going into fasting like I think, but it's at least getting into phase 2. It's done digesting and we are not consuming food when we're sleeping, and the body can repair and recuperate from our daily wear and tear. So in a typical diet, somebody is waking up and they're having a Pop-Tart or a bagel and cream cheese, or maybe they're ketogenic and they're having sausage and bacon and eggs with some avocado, or whatever the case may be. They're going to digest that for a while, and then they have some pizza, French fries, hot dogs, ham sandwich or whatever for lunch. They're going to digest that for a while. Then they've got their Snickers bar or whatever other kind of mid-afternoon snack. They go home and eat a typical modern dinner. If we're lucky, there's a few vegetables in there. They're digesting that for a while. And then maybe they have some ice cream for dessert later on, or some cake, or whatever the case may be. And basically, we're eating dense food around the clock, and we're not giving our body very much opportunity to cleanse and heal and repair. Well, here is a typical strategy for the 16-hour per day fast. And what we have here is our last meal is done by about 8 p.m., about 20 hours, and then you don't eat again until noon. Now, your schedule may vary. It may be 6 p.m. and then 10 or something different. But basically what's happening is we're still in the red zone for a while because your body is still digesting this food and maybe some of the remnants from the previous meals. And at least in my model here, at about midnight, you're done digesting, your body gets into the green zone, and you have an extended period of time here where your body gets to repair and heal itself, where instead of digesting food, it can take care of these housekeeping activities. And these extra few hours each day really add up, and that can make a huge difference. It can decrease insulin resistance, decrease your blood pressure, decrease your cholesterol, decrease your excess body fat, which is pro-inflammatory, and on and on and on. When we start to look at all these mechanisms, so many things can happen that are beneficial. Now, some of you may have heard the term time-restricted eating. So it means you've got this 8-hour window to eat and then 16 hours worth of rest. And given that most people eat food that's much too calorie dense and they eat way more calories as a result of that, this mechanism can work, or this strategy, shall we say, can work really well. Now, one of the challenges I have with this is when we apply this type of strategy to diets based on fresh fruits and vegetables, it can actually be difficult to get all of your calories in, an adequate amount of calories in that 8-hour window. So if I were to try to employ this strategy, what would happen is I would find myself eating too much cooked and concentrated food. I don't eat very much of that. I eat mostly raw food, but not exclusively. Or I would find myself making a big bowl of banana ice cream late at night because I'd know that I needed to go 16 hours without eating after that, or too much fat, or something else that would be just too dense and decrease my mental clarity, and I wouldn't feel my best. Another option that I would suggest is now we're going to take what we saw earlier and put it over on the right. And then we're going to put this lighter eating plan over here on the left. So first of all, you can see we've got an extra meal in there. The meals are spaced out, and that gives us the opportunity to eat more fruits and vegetables so we can get enough calories. So that can help us. And the thing is, you've got to take more time and eat larger volumes of food to get enough calories from fruits and vegetables. So we're going to give ourselves that opportunity with this strategy. Now, you'll notice in both of these charts that we've finished eating, but I've got a 4-hour window of digestion over here for typical modern fare and a 2-hour window of digestion for lighter fare, such as fruits and vegetables. So we start earlier, and that can be helpful because your body doesn't have to do as much work to deal with lighter food compared to heavier food. So building upon that idea, let's go to my next chart here. And let me go back and forth a couple times so you can see the charts are a little bit different here. So number one, I've actually on the right made the meal zones darker to show that those are denser meals. And they're lighter, or they're the same over here on the left. And you've also noticed here, hopefully, that the red zones aren't all red anymore. They're gradated. So they start out red when your body's digesting, but then digestion gets through a lot more quickly compared to the denser meals. So we get these green zones in the middle where the body gets a break as it goes along, which is really helpful. The other thing that we can see here is that we've started earlier. Okay, just like the previous slide, we started our fasting phase earlier, but because we've kept up as we've gone along, as we get into our fast, because we've had such a head start already by eating lighter, healthier food that's easier for the body to deal with and doesn't leave it as much toxicity to have to contend with that takes its energy. As we go further on, because we have that head start, the green here starts to get darker. We're getting deeper into healing and cleansing, and that is really fantastic. Now, once again, if I were to try to apply my fruit and vegetable-based eating habits to time-restricted eating, where I only have an 8-hour window, I would find myself overeating. So like I said before, too much banana ice cream, too much fat, more concentrated cooked foods, which means I would feel uncomfortable at each meal. My energy would drop. I would need more sleep. And then even with extra sleep, I wouldn't feel as good when I woke up. My mouth would feel coated, my mouth and teeth, my brain wouldn't be as clear, and that is not as good. So what I greatly prefer to do is eat lighter meals, eat when I'm hungry until I am comfortably full. Dr. Karen and I base our diets on fruits and vegetables, but we don't eat those exclusively. We do include some healthy fat sources, usually in our salad dressing at night, poured over mass quantities of vegetables in our giant mixing bowls, and we each have a really big mixing bowl. And we eat some healthy cooked foods occasionally as well. But when we start adding too much fat or too much cooked food, we lose that kind of extra credit edge of amazing clarity that we usually experience when we're eating our fruit and vegetable-based diets, and of course the other things like getting some exercise and enough sleep. So I wouldn't want to try to misapply the 16-hour fasting model and eat denser food that then would take my body longer to recover from. I know for myself that would not work as well because I've experimented with different things over the years. So for me, the 12-hour fasting window works better than a 16-hour fasting window. Now, one thought on getting the best of both worlds here is that you can have your first meal here could maybe just be fresh fruit or vegetable juice, or it could just be light, watery fruit. So things lighter than bananas, no dates or raisins or something like that. And then we're barely making a dent. If you eat something super light, there's less red zone here and more green zone. So you're hardly interrupting that nightly fast when your body's trying to repair and recuperate. So for example, going all the way back to the mid-1980s in the book Fit for Life, Harvey and Marilyn Diamond proposed this idea of eating only fruit until noon for exactly the reasons we're talking about, to extend that nightly fast and keep the cleansing process going. Now, the idea wasn't new at the time either, because they were looking at other people's work who had proposed this. And again, we can see that the gradated digestion zones reflect this idea. And so I know for myself, I don't like eating anything really dense first thing in the morning, and that seems to work really well. So let's look at the spectrum of health here and summarize. Most people spend most of their time down here on the left end of the spectrum. They eat difficult to digest, calorie-dense, nutrient-poor food all day long. And then the results of that are they are overweight, they have high blood pressure, diabetes, brain fog, low energy, depression, and generally are having a less than optimal experience in life in terms of their health and well-being. Most people believe that's just the way it is. Their doctor tells them, what do you expect at your age? Your parents had this, so, here you go. However, maybe you read a book on intermittent fasting or healthier eating, and you start to head over toward the right. Now, by the way, even though we see that there's a lot further to go, when we go from eating dense food to employing one of the intermittent fasting strategies like the 5-2 or the 16-hour daily fast, there can be enormous benefits in that. I don't want to downplay that. I want to recognize that from here to here is gigantic. That can make the difference as to whether you have a heart attack or not, whether you're still diabetic or not, whether you're 100 pounds overweight or not. Can make huge differences in the quality of life. But the good news here is there's further to go. So as I explained in the previous slides, extending your eating, but doing it with lighter food, I know for myself gets me way further up on the spectrum. And ultimately, you focus on that light food, but give yourself enough opportunity to eat enough food. Take a break here and there, like 12 hours a day or whatever the case may be. And you're going to do so much better. Now, even better, if we continue on over to the right, onto the next slide, here we are again, eating light with some periodic breaks. There are some bonuses that we can engage in from time to time. So light eating with a calorie deficit. So for example, you could do 2 days a week or 1 day a week on that. You can juice fast here and there. I do at least one 7 to 10 or 14-day juice fast once a year, typically in the spring. Occasionally, I make a few days in there just water, and on a few occasions throughout my life, I have water fasted for an extended period of time. But let's be very clear that these are temporary strategies. I've heard too many people tell me that, I went on this juice fast and I felt so good, or I was on some type of cleanse and it was incredible, but then they have a hard time getting back into a stable and consistent light eating mode. They're kind of going back and forth, and that can be challenging. Now, in our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition curriculum, we teach our students different options for eating diets based on whole natural plant foods with an emphasis on fresh fruits and vegetables that's super healthy and, most importantly, sustainable over the long term in the real world, so you can truly achieve a lifetime of extraordinary health. There's much more stability and consistency this way. And it can take some doing to be able to stay here, and it's both a science and an art for sure. It's kind of a lifetime endeavor. Now, we've been at this for over 30 years each. We absolutely love this stuff, and we love sharing our experiences, the findings of all the research we've done, and our clinical findings with our patients and our students. So the bottom line here is that the typical all-day eating of conventional foods, when that's your reference point, which is where most of us start out from, any healthful and sustainable strategy that gets us closer to optimizing our calorie intake, such as the various strategies that fall under the category of intermittent fasting, are going to be beneficial. Now, better yet, for any given amount of calories, the easier those calories are on your system, the better. And the more nutritious the food is that supplies those calories, yet even better. Our favorite way of bringing all of this together is by basing our diets on fresh fruits and vegetables and giving ourselves the opportunity to have enough time to eat enough food, but also allowing our digestive systems typically a 12-hour rest for each 24-hour period. This allows our body to keep up with cleansing and repairing activities as we go along and helps us maintain a very high level of health and well-being that we greatly enjoy, and it keeps giving us incentive to keep on this path. So we hope you've enjoyed this section about the benefits of intermittent fasting and how you can utilize these strategies, or better yet, transcend these by basing your diet on fruits and vegetables, which allows you to optimize your calorie intake without feeling hungry or restricted. And we also hope this has allowed you to put these concepts and practices into perspective with longevity, fasting, calorie density, and a whole food plant-based approach centered around fresh fruits and vegetables. So we wish you all the very best in your endeavors. And for those of you who would like to learn more about an opportunity to assist you with these endeavors, stay tuned. In today's webinar, we covered just a little tiny bit of the information that's available to those of you who would like to continue on your journey learning with us. Before we tell you more about how you can do that, we'd like you to consider the theme of our webinar series this year. We truly want all of you to be trend-proof, or at least very trend-resistant. Why? Because for those of us who are motivated and willing to make meaningful dietary and lifestyle changes, misinformation is probably the single largest hurdle to the process of achieving excellent health. No matter what you eat, there's someone out there to tell you why it's bad. We have the great fructose scare causing people to avoid really healthy foods like fresh fruit. We have people telling us we have to severely limit our fat intake to be healthy, and others telling us we have to eat mostly fat to be healthy. There's even people who warn us against eating vegetables. So look, folks, we are pro-fruit, pro-vegetable, and pro-fat, but all in healthy proportions within the context of an overall healthy diet and lifestyle, matched up with your individual tastes, desires, personal preferences, and individual biochemistry. Now, another trend I've seen over the last 8, 10, 12 years is that someone is actually really achieving excellent health and they're feeling great and enjoying things. But then somebody comes along with some misinformation and makes them question what they're doing. And then this actually throws them off track because they just can't get past what this other information is saying. When you are really well educated, you're so much less susceptible to this happening to you. So for example, what if somebody tells me I don't get enough protein? Well, I'm not thrown off track because I know from experience I can build muscle pretty easily. And I know the science behind the claims, and I'm covered. What if they tell me there's too much fructose in the fruit that I'm eating, and I'm going to develop obesity, fatty liver disease, and diabetes? Well, I know my glucose, A1C, insulin numbers, liver function tests, and my percentage body fat, and they're all really healthy. What if they tell me I need fish for DHA? Well, I know my DHA levels. I know the science behind it. I know that I'm not insulin resistant. I'm not suffering from depression or brain fog. You can't knock me off track because I'm too well educated. How about raw cruciferous vegetables and thyroid function? Over the last 32 years, I've consumed almost 10,000 heads of raw cauliflower and lots of kale and collards and some broccoli and cabbage here and there too. And I know my thyroid function's excellent. And so again, education has made me very much trend proof and erroneous claim proof. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we have people telling us we should be fruitarians, or we don't need to practice good dental hygiene because animals don't brush their teeth, or there's no such thing as a B12 deficiency. Well, I'm educated enough to know those things aren't true either, and they're important factors to pay attention to achieve excellent health. And when you have that level of education that leads to that level of confidence, you can truly achieve a lifetime of supercharged health. Our curriculum, Mastering Raw Food Nutrition, is designed to do exactly that. It's a 12-month online and interactive program, and our next group program begins on August 28th of 2019. There's a time commitment of 2 to 4 hours per week. So if you can commit a few hours a week for a year, cover the tuition costs, and make sure you follow through and pay attention and participate in the class, you can dramatically increase your chances for lifetime health and have a really fun time in the learning process as well. I'm first going to tell you a few of the topics that we cover in the course, and then we'll go into how it is actually delivered. So we cover a huge array of topics in our curriculum. Pretty much everything you ever wanted to know about plant-based and raw food nutrition, or even nutrition in general, based on our decades of personal research, course development, education, and clinical experience in this field. So we cover calorie density, blood sugar regulation, one of my favorite topics. Dr. Karen covers raw food sources of so many nutrients. And as you can see here, some examples: calcium, vitamin D, vitamin B12. Go into essential fats, one of my favorite topics. Acid-alkaline balance, cleansing. Where do you get your protein? Human digestion, enzymes. Longevity and youth extension. We look at a bunch of long-lived populations around the world. We look at a bunch of cellular mechanisms of physiology to put two and two together and figure out how it all works. We look at health statistics, the history of raw and living foods, different approaches to raw food nutrition, food combining, raw food weight loss connection that builds upon what we learned from calorie density, classic studies in support of plant-based nutrition. We cover Pritikin, McDougall, Ornish, Esselstyn, Barnard, so much Dr. Campbell's work, the classic data that's there. And we actually have about 4 hours worth of that. We go on then to look at why we think there are some additional advantages to more raw foods in your diet, as long as you're there in the whole food plant-based realm. So we cover various substances that form when we cook foods, depending on the food and the temperature and the cooking method and the time. And, we go into all the details there. We talk about nutrients and how heating changes nutrient levels. And yes, we cover beta carotene and lycopene very thoroughly. Moving on, Dr. Karen takes advantage of her biology degree and looks at different plant families and different foods and how that affects nutrient levels. And you really start to put two and two together. Let's see, different points of view on Candida. Dr. Karen looks at DHA in terms of xenoestrogens and phytoestrogens, and then that combines with my advanced fatty acids section, where we look at things like omega-3 conversion. And by the way, after 6 hours of going through all the fats, that's when the student I mentioned earlier in the webinar put two and two together and realized why someone who had left the movement didn't need to if they were educated in the material we talk about in this class, for example. Survey of superfoods. Dr. Karen goes through all the science and looks at marketing claims versus scientific reality and gives you a fair, accurate assessment so you know which one of those things might be helpful and which ones are just a bunch of hype. She expands on nutrients, raw food exaggerations, history of human food choices, another Dr. Karen section. Did our brains get big because of meat and fat consumption? Was it from cooked carbohydrates, starches? Was it from fruit? She objectively looks at all of those competing theories and makes sense out of them in the context of what we should be eating in the 21st century here today. Animal products, menu planning, more raw food weight loss, carbohydrates and expanded view. Dr. Karen goes through all of the different types of sweeteners out there. Now, we don't think you should be consuming many of those, but some people like to use some. It's good to know what you're dealing with. Research in support of raw food nutrition. That's a many-hour section over a few weeks. Some people say there isn't science and research to support raw food nutrition. Absolutely not. They just don't know where to look. Nutrient analyses it's so incredibly thorough. Then we start talking, we just build upon everything. An overview of energy. This is where Dr. Karen looks at questions like, does all fructose turn into fat in the liver? Does it all turn into body fat? We go through the metabolic pathways, but in an understandable way, and we make sense out of all this stuff. Advanced functions of dietary fiber, leading into probiotics and prebiotics, leading into the human microbiome. And even before that word was buzzing and trending, we laid the foundation to make all of this stuff make sense. Overcoming challenges and pitfalls in raw food nutrition. There are so many of them. And then near the end of the course, for those of you who are interested in going out and educating others, we have some built-in educator material. We actually give you some presentations. You can see it says your name here. You fill in your name, and then we show you how to modify and personalize your presentations. So you've got a structured, really excellent, solid presentation, but you personalize it so it doesn't seem canned. And then we handle how to handle audience members, credibility, topics, putting an event together, building an audience. We've got the basics of internet marketing there. So for those of you with a desire to go teach and coach others, this is incredibly valuable information. Most of our students, however, are not in that camp. They just want to learn this information for themselves and their friends and their family. And for those students, this section near the end brings all of this stuff together and integrates it so well. And when you get questions from your coworkers, your friends and family, you're able to handle those with confidence so you can take a leadership role instead of feeling like the weirdo. And so basically, by the time you finish this course, our students' level of understanding about a whole food plant-based diet with a foundation of raw fruits and vegetables is at a very, very, very high level, much higher than most of the people educating out there today. And there's so much they appreciate from the thorough and unbiased perspective that we share. Our bottom line position is that all you have to do is tell the truth, and the benefits of plant-based and raw food nutrition are naturally revealed. No outrageous claims, nothing crazy, just amazing health supporting results. Couple of quotes from our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition students' last year class. So Diane says, "Hello, Drs. Rick and Karen. I am so thankful to have been in your class. It has really been a guiding light through the maze of food information. Your scientific preciseness in evaluating what is hype from the real truth has been a real help. The detail and depth of the presentations are way beyond what I expected and are a real example of how to evaluate truth from error. Thank you for being so honest and teaching how to be critical thinkers, a skill for all of life's endeavors. Thank you all for your conscientious teaching." Now, Diane is somebody who has been on this path for longer than us. She's got a long history with this, but just like so many other people, all of this stuff coming at us today is causing confusion and eroding confidence, but we're so happy to hear from her that she is back to feeling really confident about what she's doing and has made some additional distinctions to bring her health up a few levels. A doctor from Indiana in our couple year ago class says, medical research has turned into this avalanche of new facts and theories. I think the course gave us ways to do our own research directly and start making more of our own decisions on what to believe. And I actually forgot to mention it previously. Let's get back to this section. So Dr. Karen here has a section called Searching for Science-Based Health Information. This is where she turns her experience as starting as a research assistant and doing all the research that she's done over the years. She actually teaches you how to find credible scientific information out there and make sense out of it so you can continue the learning process long after this class is over. We are always so happy when other healthcare professionals join us for the class. We've had medical doctors, nurses, people with PhDs in physiology, chiropractic colleagues, naturopathic doctors, dietitians, etc. join us. They always appreciate how accurate the science is, but at the same time, let me make it very, very clear that our course is designed for people without a science background, so everything is easy to understand. So Denise from Ecuador said, when I decided to take this course, I already had a certification in plant-based nutrition and mindful eating. So certification, not a doctorate degree. I decided I needed to know more so I could understand my body and restore my health and also help others. This course was very useful, very easy to understand. Doctors Rick and Karen are great teachers. And she said, thank you. And Denise, you are more than welcome. It was literally our pleasure. Now, as far as the way the course itself is delivered, we have put a huge amount of effort into making very high quality videos, somewhat comparable to what you're seeing here on this webinar, where you have a PowerPoint presentation and either Dr. Karen or myself giving the presentation with our high quality microphones here, so it's easy to follow along with. We have about 2 hours per week of videos, and over the course of the year, that's about 100 hours worth of video content. You can watch those videos on your own schedule. So they're there the whole time, and once we release each new set of weekly videos, they stay there for the entire course because things build upon the stuff before, and we keep building and integrating and adding to the picture and seeing how it all fits together, so you can always go back and review everything. Now, each hour of that content, when we put this curriculum together, once we were already in 20 or so years to our paths and had earned doctorate degrees, had done lots of research, had had our own clinical experience, once we got to that point, every hour that you see in our course was about a full-time week worth of research, investigating, thinking about how to spell it out so it makes sense for everybody, making charts and graphs and putting the PowerPoints together so you don't have to spend thousands of hours and years worth of time trying to figure things out. It is all condensed down, and it is an incredibly efficient use of your time because we know that people's lives are busy. Each video is typically broken down, or each 2 hours is usually broken down into videos of 20 to 30 minutes to make it easy to watch a segment at a time, or just to, keep going through all of them. We also provide for you some very comprehensive notebooks. There are 4 notebooks that we physically mail to you throughout the course of the year. That's about 900 pages worth of notes. And these notes are designed to complement the videos. So if you have your notebooks open while you're watching the videos, you don't have to try to write everything down as quickly as possible. Although if you do want to write something else down, just hit pause, take a few notes, and continue on. But the majority of what we say on the videos and the majority of what you see in the presentations are actually in the notes for you. So that way you've got the notes there. You can watch the videos and really pay attention so the information sinks in, so you understand it, so you can use it. Everything is designed with our students in mind. And I'm going to see if I can make myself bigger here. And I'm going to take a look over here. And if you give me just a second, I'll show you a couple of samples of one of our notebooks. And so here we have Dr. Karen's section. See if I can line that up with the camera on the connection with vitamin B12 and folate. Here we have a section on essential fats. We can see near my thumb there the different types of fats and the different shapes that they are. Let's see, we go into omega-3 and omega-6 food sources. We've got inflammatory considerations. There's omega-3 conversion. The next section after that is pH balance. So here we have some more from Dr. Karen. And basically everything's laid out in logical bullet points so you can see and follow along. It took an awful lot of effort for us to put this together, to think it through, to coordinate it with the videos. But once again, it's all designed to help you understand what you are seeing. And our students have told us over and over again how much they appreciate having those notebooks, because once the course is over, they are lifetime reference material. And again, many of our students have told us they refer to them frequently when they want to look things up again and figure things out and review. Another one of our students, Rhonda from South Carolina, tells us, in today's world where most people have no true understanding of nutrition and how our bodies function, this should be a required course for all high school students. We think for everybody for that matter. With an obesity epidemic skyrocketing, studying what foods the body needs to stay healthy and thrive would change the direction of the next generation. And we could talk a lot about that. We are absolutely on the same page with Rhonda, and we love when our students start to really see that big vision and how much of a difference those of us who are properly educated can go out and share, and how much of a difference that can make for people. So we talked about the videos that you watch on your own schedule. You've got the comprehensive notebooks that complement the videos to enhance the learning process. We also have conference calls. They're on Tuesdays. We have 6 to 8 of those per month at 2 different times on Tuesdays to cover people from different parts of the world, because we have students from all over the globe. And that is where you meet with us in small groups with your fellow students and ask questions about the course content and get feedback directly from us to help clarify, make sense out of things, and make sure you're understanding what you're seeing, and for us to be there for you. We don't just plop a bunch of stuff down on you and say, okay, you're on your own. We're there for you every week, except the last Tuesday of the month we take off. So even if you can't make a particular call, we've got it set up so you can type in questions in advance or even during the call. And on the calls, we go back and forth between live questions and written in questions. We answer those to the best of our ability, and then we record and save all of the calls so you can ask questions in advance. And then even if you're not there on the call, go after and listen to the recording, and you've got everything covered. It's not quite real time, but it's still direct interaction with us. And our students really, really appreciate having that interaction on those conference calls. Kim from Decatur, Georgia, said, after being vegan for 18 years, I was very indecisive about mastering raw food nutrition, especially with the time and cost involved. I'm so glad that I decided to take the class and feel that the education I gained is well worth the time and money spent. I now have a great understanding of the importance of raw foods and which should be included daily, supplementation, medical test requirements, and foundational and research background. This class really cuts through all of the rhetoric, and that's so very true. She also said, I loved the all-encompassing, non-judgmental, down-to-earth manner you both have. I felt very welcomed to participate in the calls. Speaking of those calls, I immensely looked forward to the videos and calls each week. Thank you both for this education and experience. And Kim, you are more than welcome. So in addition to the videos, the notebooks, and the calls, we also have a Facebook group. And that's where students get to know each other a little bit, general community support. And we found over the few years of teaching this course online now that the Facebook group really comes in handy at maybe half of our conference calls. When we're answering questions, we will post some additional supporting information in the Facebook group. So it might be a link to an article about, heavy metals and sea vegetables or something relevant to the course discussion. It might be a journal article reference or something else that we use, again, to support the question. So the Facebook group really comes in handy as well. You're not required to be in the Facebook group, though, if you don't want, because some people have legitimate concerns about their privacy with all going on with Facebook today. But it's a private group. No one else is in there. It's pretty safe. We have yet to have any type of problem. So that explains the basic ways that the course is put together. Now, in terms of Dr. Karen and I, on the one hand, we expose you to many, many different topics and ideas. Like you saw in those slides, you saw the thumbnails of some of our videos in the course. So the thing is, though, we are a married couple and we're both very enthused about what we're doing. So on the one hand, we're different people and you get a different perspective, but we're very well integrated. So all of that material integrates together in the curriculum. You see how it all fits together as a whole as we keep building and expanding and adding more things in. It's very, very cohesive. And that's just so important, because one of our primary goals is to cut through the confusion so all of our students understand things. And yes, we're pretty nerdy, but again, that's to your advantage, though. And to my knowledge, we're the only dual doctorate degree couple in the raw food community, or I think in the plant-based community. Now, if one's a doctor and the other makes recipes, we have no criticism with that, but it's really cool when Dr. Karen reads something or I read something and we're trying to figure things out. We can talk to each other about it, and there's so much synergy in that because we're both understanding things at a very deep level. So you put all this together and it is a winning combination. Laura from Mexico said, "This has been the best journey of knowledge in the path of a healthy life. Many of my doubts have been clarified with scientific support. In this world where so much false information is shared, it's imperative to have the truth. Mastering raw food nutrition is a great opportunity to learn and understand in the best way." She also said, "I really love the way you've put together the course. Both have a clear speaking voice that helped me understand pretty well. Thank you." And Laura from Mexico, like many of our students, are from all over the world, and English is not their first language. So over and over, we've heard that people can understand us well, and that's when people are, from, again, all over the world, and so that's really helpful. So if English is not your first language, you can probably still do well in the course. If you're following this webinar, you'll be able to follow the course, and you can always hit pause and go back and catch up. And we're really happy to hear Laura's comments. Tim from Canada said, "I had just recently become a raw vegan a short time before starting the course. For me, the course was a lifesaver. I am the only one I know who has taken such a dramatic dietary change, and no one around me knew anything about it or could help me along the way. It was tough listening to friends and family asking so many questions and basically saying I was crazy. The course was there to educate me, and in time, others began asking me questions about health. A fantastic course to help anyone who wants to improve their knowledge. on how to be healthy. And we know that Tim's health improved dramatically based on what he learned in the course. And Tim's a great example of someone who he already has a full-time career and he wanted to learn about this information. But when people asked him about it, he had solid information to share with them. So over time, he didn't seem so crazy. Laurențiu from Romania said, "This course gives systematic and structured information loaded with examples and studies that can help understand better the need to eat vegan and the benefits of a raw vegan lifestyle." And Carla from the UK said, "I have learned so much from this course. Dr. Dina's break down the information without bias and give you pure scientific facts. I love what I have learned from this course, and I am so glad I chose this course over IIN." That's a whole other big discussion. There are other programs out there. Various ones have their advantages and disadvantages. So to summarize, our program covers 2 hours of professionally made videos per week. You have thoughtfully designed notebooks for each subject, 4 notebooks overall that we mail to you, near weekly conference calls, and a Facebook group for support. And it's all designed to help you understand this information so you can achieve a lifetime of supercharged health. Remember earlier when I showed you the photo of when I was overweight and having a bad allergy day? And based on the way I felt, I was motivated to make some changes? I made the decision to change my course, and I am so happy that I did. Now it's time for you to make a decision. You're watching this webinar because you're interested in plant-based and raw food nutrition and in taking your knowledge to the next level so you can supercharge your health and maintain it for a lifetime. At this point, you've already got a really good idea if you want to continue your learning journey with us. Our next group program begins in late August, and once it fills, it won't be offered again until the summer of 2020 and likely at a higher price. You can watch the course videos on your own schedule and re-watch them as many times as you'd like. This gives plenty of time for the information to sink in. And then in addition to the comprehensive set of notes to help you follow along with the weekly videos and to be lifetime reference material, we also have the almost weekly question and answer sessions in real time in small groups directly with us. Or like I mentioned, you can type your questions in advance and listen to the recordings afterwards, so close to real time. The Facebook group is also there to support the learning process. We love connecting with our students and will be there with you the whole way for all 12 months. You can access this course anywhere you have an internet connection, which is most places on the planet. We'll be sending you an email shortly where we'll invite you to sign up for a time to speak with us to answer any questions you may have about the curriculum and the structure of the class to help determine if it's a good fit for you. You can also click on the schedule link that's on your screen right now. We look forward to speaking with you about your health goals and how mastering raw food nutrition can help you achieve them. Now we're going to take a 5-minute intermission, and after that, we'll be back to answer your questions. In the meantime, please feel free to sign up for a time to speak with us.